Aloha, this is Allen Murabayashi speaking to you from PhotoShelter remote headquarters in Honolulu, Hawaii, where I am out here volunteering for a high school program. Bom dia to you, Fernando, in New York City, the world headquarters of PhotoShelter. How are you doing today?
Bon dia. I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm not in Hawaii though, so that's a bummer. But
Well, we're covering the world. Covering the world. You might be listening to us on YouTube or watching us on YouTube at youtube.com/photoshelter, or you might have downloaded the podcast by going to iTunes and searching for I Love Photography. Here's episode number 58 of I Love Photography. Let's step right into it. A couple of weeks ago, Fernando, we talked about the onerous concert photography contract of Taylor Swift. And after some rumblings that some photographers made by writing those open letters and some rumblings by the NPPA and others, we're happy to report that Taylor Swift's company has made some concessions on photography, including where you can use the photo more than once for news purposes.
yeah, this was a good update to that story. I think that some photographers got what they kind of hoped for. I think in that article they mentioned that the Taylor Swift management people even had the right to take the memory cards out of the photographers at the concert
and like destroy them or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought that was a bit ridiculous. So it's not the best situation for either party probably, but it's better than it was 2 weeks ago.
You know what I thought was interesting about this? This whole discussion of the concert photography was really caused by Taylor herself, because she had criticized iTunes for not paying artists for the new iTunes streaming for 3 months. And in response, that photographer wrote the open letter, which led to this discussion. So she kind of set her own place at the table there, which is interesting. But I'm glad to see that photographers have benefited as a result of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Enough of that. Enough of Taylor Swift. Here is a new book called Tippi, My Book of Africa. And it is from the photographers. Let's see, what were their names again? Two photographers whose names I am looking for. And their daughter was raised in Africa. And they took photos of her growing up in Africa. And now they're releasing a book many, many years later. So here she is. This is Tippi. She's now 23 and living in France, but here are these lovely photos of her interacting with the wildlife, growing up in the bush. And the photographers' names are, I'm going to find them here. They're somewhere in the article.
Yes,
Sylvie Roberts. So my initial reaction to this was, this is wonderful. This is great. This is just like Jungle Book, the real Mowgli, they're calling it. And then my second reaction, I think partially informed by discussions that have been going around, I couldn't help but feel like this is a bit of cultural appropriation, because there's nothing really that fantastic about these scenes other than it's a white girl in Africa. So then I started thinking, maybe we shouldn't be celebrating these photos as much as we initially did. Because if it was just a black kid in Africa, that's not newsworthy. And if it was a black kid from Africa growing up in the US, it wouldn't be newsworthy because he's a black kid. But suddenly, because it's a little white kid, hanging onto an elephant, all of a sudden it's noteworthy. It deserves a huge spread in the daily news.
Yeah, in the beginning, I thought that when I first started looking at the photos and reading the article, I thought that she had somehow grown up in those cultures with those tribes, and she just happened to be photographed or found. But she was just on a trip with her family. So yeah. It is more like there's more of this intruder Western person invading that life aspect to it, as opposed to a genuine subject matter.
And I'm not saying that the experience for Tippi wasn't real and legitimate, because I think it seems like she spent sufficient time there. Obviously, like, you're not going to go up to an animal and have that animal be comfortable with you unless you've spent time with the animal. So I think her experience is authentic, but I had a funny feeling in my stomach about kind of celebrating this photography because of these reasons. So great photos. I think it's interesting, an interesting look in Africa, but it was taken close to 20 years ago, and I think that was the time when you could have published it and nobody would have raised these issues. 20 years ago in the mid-90s, it would be like, oh, this is so fun.
Yeah.
But now I think we're a little more culturally sensitive.
Or aware.
Exactly. Over on the Lens blog, Joni Sternbach has been going out to different surf spots on Long Island and taking a tintype, chemistry and all, and taking portraits of surfers out there.
And all over the world too.
Yeah, and a bunch of places over the world, but not Hawaii, but maybe we'll get her out here at some point. Really fascinating look. There's something about these old analog processes, particularly tintype for me. We've looked at Victoria Will's portraits from Sundance, all of which have kind of a very almost haunting quality to them. I think there's something about that, the contrast of the darks in the tintype. I'm just fascinated by the fact that she dragged her chemistry out onto the beach, because this isn't the type of thing where you can, take the photo and then go back 6 hours later and then develop it. You've got to do the tintype chemistry on the spot. Yeah,
and you need to move that stuff with a truck. It's a hefty load that you're carrying, and to put it on the beach. And I like that she initially was photographing the beach. She was photographing waves and the sky, and then the surfers were getting in the way of her shot, and she just decided to start photographing them, and she found her subject matter. And I thought that was really interesting. And she really captures this surfer vibe, I guess, and with this old school process. They're really great tintypes.
Being open to the possibility of your project evolving, I think, is a pretty good quality to have as a photographer, because you never know what you're going to find. And really in life, in businesses, we often have to, do what we call the pivot. And I think your willingness to pivot when opportunity approaches you seems like it worked out in her favor this time.
Yeah, so many times over the past few years when I was at photo school, I would be working on a project and I thought that I was done. I thought that, oh, okay, I've taken the last image of this project and this is complete. It's working and it's finished. Only to naively be saying that and then a week later take an even better photo, and kick out everything else I had.
Have you ever tried any analog processes like these, like tintype?
There was a class for alternative processes, but I did not take it.
Ooh.
I know. I was on more of the digital manipulation class.
Yeah.
That was more of my game.
I'm definitely curious. I don't know that I would have the patience to do this on a regular basis, but it seems, a lot of things that large format and alternative process photographers say is always that the images are precious. They're not just throwaways anymore, and people react differently when you're doing kind of these slower processes. So I'm just intellectually curious about this.
No, people do. They have more of a respect for it, I think, than if you just pulled out your iPhone and said it was for your Instagram or something.
Well, maybe I'll check out and see if ICP or SVA have a tintype class to take. That might
they
be
do.
Nice.
Lisa Elma is a teacher. She's
all right. Over on American Photography's Pro Photo Daily, Fernando, you found this series of portraits of the ocean, and I gotta say, this opening shot is pretty magnificent.
It is. I don't think I've ever seen water photographed quite like this. It's so sculptural. There's so much depth to it, but darkness as well. And it feels so heavy. You feel the weight of the water. It was just really mesmerizing to look at these.
It almost looks computer generated in a way.
And what does that say? Really great things about computer generated graphics, or really crappy things about us?
I think it says, I do think it says incredible things about computer generated graphics, but I think it says more to the photographer that they were there and they caught this moment that is, to your point, very sculptural, very dynamic. And the light is amazing.
Yeah.
So there are a bunch from Ray Collins and some other photographers, but Ray's really capturing kind of, I guess, what I would call peak wave. I don't know that you get better at capturing the peak wave. And here's Scott Hoyle's image of a wave kind of hitting the shore and seeing kind of the foam and the spray.
It's abstracted. Yeah, it's a nice composition there too.
I couldn't help but thinking when I was looking at these images, all of which are very different in their style. Here we're looking at Jeff Friesen. They're all very, very different, and some of the initial ones really reminded me of the work of Clark Little, to bring it back to Hawaii, as I often do. But Clark Little is a North Shore-based photographer, and his wife wanted some photos for the house one day, so he went out into the surf and he started taking photos of the waves crashing. And when he came back and looked at the photos, he said, well, that's pretty interesting. So he kept going out and he got a surf housing and he started taking these photos, and now he's kind of a big deal. I mean, I don't know that he necessarily invented this style, but I've seen a lot of people kind of copy this shore break photography, like right on the shore with the sun coming through and being enveloped by the wave. It all feels very inspirational.
Yeah, inspirational, a little touristy maybe.
A little touristy,
decorative, but they're nice photos, and I'm sure it took effort to get them and get there. So
these are the kind of photos, you know, when I look at this and I look at the tintypes, it's not that I want to do that type of photography, but sometimes I wish I just had one or two photos in my portfolio of that type of photography. This is kind of a checklist. Oh yeah, I did that once. I took a nice photo of that.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
We've seen some wonderful aerial photography by Vincent Laforet, whose air project has gone around to different cities around the world and gone up into a helicopter at over a mile high in the sky. I think he actually goes to 7,000 feet. Well, Vincent is in his mid to late 30s, and that's certainly something to celebrate. But here's a 71-year-old in LA hanging out the side of a helicopter to shoot the beauty of LA. He's not as high as Vincent is, but look at these images. They're beautiful. There's a really nice symmetry. And you can hardly believe the guy's 71 and still hanging out of a helicopter, because from everything that I've heard about people who've done helicopter shoots, they're very, very taxing. The vibration, hanging out the door, thinking you're going to fall.
There's so many factors to consider, and it's not, I don't think in these circumstances, it's not, you know, spray and pray. I think you have to compose your shots. You have to really be careful when you're shooting, and he does some amazing work. I like this photo in particular with the highway and the freeways crossing over each other.
Yep.
Kind of like the new True Detective opener.
Definitely. Yeah, True Detective is well known for their aerial shots. You know, there's something about aerial photography. I just never get bored of it. I mean, there's good aerial photography and there's bad aerial photography. I never get bored of good aerial photography because it's such an interesting perspective.
It is.
They've just really, and this guy really nails it.
Yeah, and I think he's trying to say a lot about how we live and how we organize ourselves in society and in our cities. And, you know, that whole cookie cutter, ticky boxes, one after the other, everything kind of looks the same after a while. But there's so much of an order to it. It's for an OCD person, that's really great. Like myself, so I love these.
This one's cool, of boats at a marina, but there are two boats that are coming up and down kind of the pathway with a little bit of a wake there. These would be great to see blown up large on a wall in a gallery. Yeah,
and especially since these are, I think, medium format, so you could really get in close in those.
Yeah. So Jeffrey Milstein, keep doing what you're doing at 71. We love these photos. This wasn't so much a photo story, but over on the New York Times, there was a long form piece about human trafficking. And the photographer Sergey Ponomarev, who's won some accolades at World Press, I don't know, I was just really kind of stunned by the quality of these photos from a photojournalistic standpoint, but also just aesthetically. He's doing something with the toning. They're slightly desaturated, but there's kind of a silvery quality to them that really make the photos quite gripping to me. And I'm curious to hear what your reaction was to these photos.
I thought the one that you're stopping at right now was of the people walking through the field with the dark sky behind it. I thought that was a particularly haunting photo. It's I don't know, it's scary on so many levels. There's this huge storm coming, and you have this darkness coming from the foreground out, and the people are walking towards it. And then given the context of the story of the human trafficking, you can't help but fear for the subjects in these photos. And you have, from the older guy to the little baby, you have this whole generation of fear, basically. And
there's something really about the tone, the color tone of the image too, with that kind of dark steel blue and the green. I definitely agree. This is a very visceral and emotional photo for some reason.
Yeah, and they are desaturated, but you can still see this color, but it's like there's not any color, and there will never be any color, just in the mood of the photos in general. It's just despair. That's what I get from it a lot.
Yeah, and here's a photo of two rickshaw drivers in the rain, and you see the rain kind of pelting down in a vertical, a diagonal motion.
Yeah.
And again, kind of the same ominous feel to the whole thing. So my question would be, first of all, I love these photos. My question would be, did he take too much artistic freedom in the toning to kind of reinforce this notion of it being ominous, or is it fine, do you think?
I think to a certain extent, to this extent, it's fine. I don't think it's that over the top, because when you are taking your artistic opinion and your voice when you point the camera at what you point it at, so that's already the first step that you make in deciding what you are depicting. So I think that changing the exposure and the color balance a little bit doesn't really affect the message. It just enhances what he was experiencing and what the story says.
Here's a wonderful photo. We're on a riverbank. There's a stone wall, and there's a man praying, and he pops the whites on the man a little bit compared to the rest of the scene. The guy is wearing very light colored clothing in the first place, but he's a small figure in the center of the frame, and your eye just goes straight to him. I was just really impressed with all the photos in this story, and I look forward to seeing more by Sergey. I hope that he continues to cover this story. He has done similar stories in the past, so really knocked it out of the park on this one. Worth taking a look over in the New York Times. This link and all the links we're talking about today are available on the blog at blog.photoshelter.com if you'd like to see the photos that we're looking at. A few days ago, the National Archives of the United States of America released never before seen photos from the 9/11 attacks. So 14 years later, we're seeing behind the scene photos of Bush, Cheney, and the White House staff. When you think of these images in context of the day, they're pretty remarkable. The one thing I couldn't get over, which is superficial on my part, is how crappy film looks in low light. It just does not stand up initially, and then over time as the negatives age. I mean, it just doesn't look that good. I know that's the most shallow thing to say, but we're criticizing not only what photos are saying, but also what the photos look like. And when I look at the photos that have come out of the White House today with the brilliance of digital and the low light capabilities of the cameras, I mean, these look like old photos because they are old photos, and because the quality of film is that way.
It might also have been something on the processing side of things, because these were never meant to go to press, so they wouldn't have taken the time to really work with them to bring out, the colors of the light.
That's very true. That's very true.
Something like that. But it is an interesting perspective into this moment after the tragic attack, and it's just something that we would never see, how they reacted, how they dealt with it. And you can kind of tell in their expressions a lot of the time that they're just in despair. They're not knowing, what to do. And I don't know.
We said last week when we were looking at those photos from the 80s in Italy, and I commented on, the thinness of people. And in talking about, other historical photos where the hairstyles and the dress changes pretty dramatically, I'm actually surprised at how contemporary the hairstyles and the dress, and you know, I was expecting like a huge CRT monitor on Cheney's desk, but he actually has a flat screen monitor, which I guess in 2001, I guess those are pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
But you'd be hard pressed to really say, like, in this image, what year this was, other than the fact that he's got the Twin Towers on his television.
True.
Just interesting stuff. Adweek has a really interesting piece on a clothing store for teens and tweens called Forever 21. You might have seen these in your local mall. They're kind of they try to be very, very hip and low cost. And they decided as a marketing promotion, they would build or a contract to build a giant, I'm going to call it a monitor, a thread monitor. And the thread monitor will accept your Instagram photos and turn them into images on the thread monitor. It's a huge monitor. So 6,400 wooden spools feature rainbow ribbons that spin to change among 36 colors. And we're watching a video, and I know it's horrible to watch a video over the webcast, but it's pretty remarkable the way this thing works.
Yeah, I think they go behind the scenes in how they built this, and it was just an insane process that took, I think, over a year and a half to do.
I got to say, I watched the behind the scenes video and I was fascinated. I couldn't figure out what the heck they were doing. I still don't have an idea of like what exactly the thread spools are, because they didn't look like, they're like fat threads. They're not a single filament of thread.
Yeah, I still don't know how this works.
But I think this is in New York somewhere, isn't it?
It probably is. It probably is.
And anyway, if you read the article, there's a way that you can use a hashtag, hashtag F21 thread screen. And apparently your images can go up. It was built by a Brooklyn agency from scratch. Amazing. Amazing what you can do nowadays.
Truly amazing.
You brought up Beme last week. Beme is the new social screen capture, live capture app from Casey Neistat, viral video fame. And over on Wired, Kyle Van Hemert has an op-ed about it. Beme has a problem. Authenticity is boring. And he says, and I think rightfully so, that, you know, the success of social media, the ongoing success of social media, is because we evolved past telling everyone what we were doing every single moment of the day. And we got to the point where we realized curation was important in audience building. Yeah,
and I think, I do like the point that the author makes in this article. We are curating our lives with these social media, and you know, even in Snapchat, which is supposed to be the direct competitor of. In Snapchat, you are curating what you're showing, and you're trying to get the best view of what you're doing. And even when you're doing stories and trying to tell people every moment of your day, you're still making it look a certain way, and you're still selecting what you're showing. So I think, I
don't have a problem with a curated life, because our brains curate our life anyway. Our brains cause us to remember certain events and forget other events. And so similarly, I think it's fine that you curate your life. The difference is your audience's reaction to the curation. Some people have this intense feeling of FOMO, fear of missing out. And then, you know, I just read an article today in the New York Times about a rash of suicides at University of Pennsylvania, in part because of the pressure they felt, like, oh, this person won the science contest and this person's jet setting all over the world, and I have FOMO, I'm not doing enough. You've got to manage your response to seeing a curated life and say, oh, that's a curated life. You've got to be realistic.
You have to understand that everything you see online has been carefully thought out and edited. And yeah, it's not a realistic depiction of the person's life by any means.
I'm still skeptical of Beme's chances for success. I love the concept of being present. I love the concept of not going to a live concert and watching it through the screen of your phone. But to the author's point, I just think that that you need to be able to curate, and the live cast is going to have a very limited shelf life, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's more of a question of our use of these tools, our interaction with them, and our understanding of their place in our lives, more than the tools themselves.
Totally agree. Totally agree with that. The LA Times is a pretty interesting story about a World War II vet named Sus Ito. And he was in the highly decorated 442nd Regiment. It was an all Japanese American regiment at a time where many Japanese Americans were interned in camps in the United States of America. Volunteers in the army got sent all over the world and became the most heavily decorated and suffered many of the most losses on a per capita basis. But this guy, Susumu Ito, decided he was going to take a small pocket camera in his travels, which was illegal. And he started taking some really, really interesting photos of just sort of daily life. But the guy went everywhere, all over Europe, in major, major battles, and just has some interesting scenes of life that don't look like the typical kind of PR photo coming out of the military at the time.
Especially because he was focusing on his brigade unit.
Yeah.
That was prevalent with Japanese Americans and not the GI Joes of that time. It was showing
exactly. Kind of shocking to see in a lot of ways. It reminds you how sort of programmed we are by what we've seen in history books and old movie reels and whatnot, to say this is what war was like. And what was that Brad Pitt movie? All these Brad Pitt movies that come out from the war. The one about the tank and whatnot. You never see an Asian American soldier in there. And yet here he is outside the Coliseum. I mean, what on earth?
Yeah, this is a very interesting look into that side of things that we had never really seen before.
And not great photos compositionally by any stretch of the imagination, but such an interesting look at a time where you don't see this type of subject matter being Japanese Americans in the context of the war. So just fascinating to see this stuff come out. Feature Shoot, one of our favorite sites for photography. Here's a great series called Wonderlust, WONDER, not Wanderlust, not the lust for travel. But Andi Schreiber is the photographer, and just such an interesting style of photography. How would you describe this photography?
I don't know. It's a mix of, Nan Golden and Eleanor Carucci. And that's that was my struggle with it, is that it doesn't seem to know what perspective it wants to take on this life. I think in the article they pull the ones that kind of make sense together a little bit more, but I went on through to her website, or excuse me, his website, or Andy's website, and it seems that it was kind of all over the place in that it was trying to be really sentimental and showing these close moments of family time and interaction and tenderness, but then it would also show these gritty, kind of like Richard Billingham photos that just contrasted way too much with these other ones. So I don't know. Individually they're very good photos and they tell a lot of the story, but I just don't know how they work together necessarily.
I like your analysis. It strikes me that like this edit I liked, but I get your point. Seeing probably the bigger body of work, there probably isn't as much coherence to it visually. I like the grittiness of the photos. I thought there was a very real, and I wouldn't say hyper real, but Andy's really trying to push this sort of grittiness of life, of like suburban life. It's not gritty in kind of an inner city way, but it's kind of a gritty in the way that young boys might scratch each other. And here's a photo of that, 1 minute after the scratch. That sort of resonated with me to a certain extent, but I certainly understand your criticism. Yeah,
I agree with that. I think that this is a very good edit by the Feature Shoot editor.
Andy, hire a good editor. You're going to be good. You're going to be good. I love food photography. Here's a Danish photographer, and I'm going to butcher this name, Mikkel Jus Hvilshøj, who was hired by a cookware company, I believe it was, to photograph a set of images of food prior to as ingredients, prior to them being made into an actual dish. And we've seen similar photography. I'm thinking of the modernist cuisine with Nathan Myhrvold, who wrote a 6-volume set, and the photographer whose name's escaping me, but they did some images that are sort of, similarly evocative. I like the symmetry of these images. I like the color palette of these images. I didn't love the set of images because I feel like it's been done before.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great ad campaign.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I don't know if it goes much further than that. But it's fun for what it's selling. It's a nice way to do that, I think.
Yeah, you can definitely see type being put over these images and being very effective visually in a magazine. But I don't know that you would ever go to a gallery to look at this stuff, nor would you necessarily pay to put this on your wall.
Unless you were the restaurant in question.
Exactly. Good point. Always ending on a fun note or a light note or an inspirational note. In this case, a little bit of a nostalgic note.
A depressing note.
Depressing note. Over on Mashable, photos of the original Penn Station before it was destroyed and turned into MSG, Madison Square Garden, where the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers and many, many concerts are played. But
this just made me sad. This made me really sad looking at these.
It's hard to fathom that politicians at some moment in time said, we're going to tear this thing down to put up MSG.
To put up MSG. I can't get over it. I didn't know that my New York history isn't very on point, so I didn't know that this existed. And I was just utterly shocked to see the beauty of Penn Station and what it is now.
I know, because when you walk into Grand Central Station and they've cleaned that ceiling a few times and you see the brilliance of the blue and the constellations, and that's a pretty big hall. Yeah. But I'm guessing that this building was far larger and far more grand than what we see at Grand Central. And you can, the light streaming in through the windows. And they would never build a building like this anymore. It would be too cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
Look at this detailing on the ceiling. Oh my God. Oh yeah. Okay. You're right. I'm getting sad now.
I mean, at least we have these great photos to survive it.
So the New York Public Library actually has a huge stash, and this is where we're seeing these photos from, I believe. They put up a ton of photography that you can search on a map, a Google map, and pull up different areas of New York from different decades. And I was looking at the block on which my building was built in 1910s or 1920s, and you can see my apartment building going up, and it's the biggest building at the time anywhere in the sight lines. It's just really fascinating to see the growth of a city, and in some cases the decline of a city.
Yeah, which seems to be where it's headed.
Oh, okay. Well, that wasn't quite the inspirational note that I wanted to end on, but a lot of good photography that we saw this week for episode 58. Fernando, hold down the fort in New York. I think we're going to do maybe one more show before I come back from Hawaii.
I'll try to hold it down. I'll try not to have any buildings demolished for sports arenas anytime soon.
Exactly. So for Fernando Gomes, this is Allen Murabayashi signing off. Thanks for watching I Love Photography. Bye-bye.